Hey fellow Manhwa fans, welcome to Manhwa Odyssey, where today we're delving into the captivating world of The Last Adventurer. Ooh, I know this is going to be good. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and spread the word to your friends who are into Manhwa. Trust me, you won't want to miss out on the adventure we have in store for you. So grab your seat, and let's dive right in. The narrator continues by stating that while some argue the appearance of gates gave rise to the era of adventure, it was, in fact, a trap laid by the Black Mage. Many adventurers lost their lives within the gates, slowly depriving Maple World of its potential. The apocalypse eventually came as countless monsters flooded out of the gates, as though they had been waiting for that day. The adventurers were overwhelmed and defeated. This catastrophic event is set to occur in exactly 3 years. The tragic fate of Maple World looms near. The scene shifts to the guildmaster, who is gazing out the window, smoking a cigar, while Paume is seen leaving the building. "I still have a long way to go," Paume says to himself, "but this is enough to start my plan." The newly discovered 100-person gate is marked red, meaning only those with 2 or fewer circle levels can enter. The Gapore Merchant Guild typically hires adventurers with higher circles, but they're investing in Paume due to this unique gate. "I finally have some money to spend," he thinks, "but I must be wise with it. Wasting it all at once would be foolish." He considers that the truly useful items are likely beyond his current budget. "So what's the most efficient thing I can buy with the money I borrowed?" Paume pauses as he observes the sign above, indicating he's reached his destination. A cheerful seller approaches and greets him. "Hello. Welcome to the Reese job market. You look like an adventurer. How can I assist you?" Nearby, other adventurers are negotiating prices for baiting slaves. The seller asks Paume, "Are you looking for a decoy slave or someone to fight alongside you?" Paume shakes his head. "There's someone I'm looking for. Take me to him," he replies. The seller, taken aback, stammers. They make their way underground. As the seller explains, "These are the punishment quarters. Some of our biggest troublemakers end up here for correction." They stop at a cell, and the seller gulps nervously before saying, "This way." A hand is seen chained to the wall. The seller turns to Paume, asking, "Are you sure about this?" Before the seller can finish, Paume cuts him off. "I know." They approach the figure in chains, and Paume recognizes him. "Yeah, he's the one I'm looking for," he says. The slave, staring back with fiery eyes, remains silent. Paume's thoughts reveal the importance of this encounter. In his previous life, the death of a certain individual hastened Maple World's destruction. Aran, the polyarm hero, was murdered, and the culprit was none other than her apprentice Debo, known as the hero murderer. This incident marked the beginning of the end. Debo, unfazed by Paume's presence, spits on the ground, saying, "I've never seen you before." "Get lost." The seller nervously apologizes, remarking that Debo still hasn't learned manners. Paume observes that Debo, despite still being a slave, is already showing the fiery attitude that will eventually make him famous. He may be a slave now, Paume thinks, but in a few years he'll gain fame and status. Yet here he is, insolent to the adventurer who could be his master. The seller sighs, calling Debo barbaric. Paume chuckles for the first time, agreeing. True, and it's not just his attitude. After the apocalypse, he was one of the most influential individuals alongside me. Paume asks, "How much?" As Debo is unchained and freed, he scoffs. "You must come from a wealthy family to even ask. Do you think you can afford me?" 1,000,000 mesos. Paume remains calm, reaching into his satchel and pulling out a stack of cash. Debo is stunned. 1,000,000 mesos, he exclaims, unable to believe his eyes. The seller also looks astonished. "Are you sure about this?" he asks. "Don't get too excited," Paume replies. "This is a 1-year contract. We'll split the profit 70-30, and I will have ownership of all loot acquired within the gate." The seller is shocked. Is he trying to hire him as a party member instead of a slave, he wonders. Paume hands Debo the contract and says, "Look over the terms." Debo snatches the contract, smirking. "No backing out now." "Okay," he bites his finger, using his blood as a stamp of confirmation. Paume observes that Debo didn't hesitate. His concern for his little sister, suffering from the black blood plague, is driving his decisions. As the contract is signed, Paume says, "We're heading to the gate right away." Debo, now excited, replies, "I was waiting for you to say that." Paume and Debo transition into a beautiful, lush forest. Debo speaks up, "Boss, I appreciate the new weapon and all, but I'm more comfortable with a longsword. Shouldn't I be using something I'm proficient with?" Paume, without looking back, responds, "While you're working with me, you'll be using the polyarm. If you have objections, we can terminate the contract." Debo grumbles, "Oh, fine." As they approach a red tier, 1 marked gate with an 8-person limit, Debo comments, "This gate fits the description." But what about the rest of the party? I know you've got enough money to hire them. El Paume stops and stares at Debo. You and me, he replies calmly. Debo blinks in surprise. Wait, is this a joke? Before he can react, El Paume kicks him into the portal. Don't waste time, El Paume commands as Debo falls, screaming, into the red portal. They land with a flash in a rocky desert. Debo, now on all fours, angrily asks, "Are you crazy? What can the two of us possibly do in a gate designed for 8 people?" He complains about being forced to use a weapon he's not familiar with. Suddenly, a cloud of dust rises nearby, and Debo exclaims, "Those are tree stumps, walking tree stumps." A horde of them begins rushing toward them, likely attracted by Debo's earlier scream. These monsters are resistant to blades, Debo mutters, and there's a lot of them. El Paume, standing firmly in front, tells Debo, "Step aside," confused. Debo says, "Wait, what are you?" But El Paume is already moving. A fire arrow shoots from El Paume's hand, creating a fiery trail through one of the stumps. Debo watches in amazement as El Paume's fire arrow weaves through the monsters, destroying several in a single shot. The remaining stumps fall to the ground in smoldering heaps. El Paume turns to Debo and, with a hint of sarcasm, says, "Maybe don't scream as soon as we enter the gate next time." Debo is speechless, still wondering who El Paume really is. Back in the city, under the light of a full moon, a girl kneels before a man standing by a window. "The trade guild took the bait," she reports, her voice low. "They're moving forward with the plan, but our people are among them." The man, holding a wine glass, glances out at the moon. "Proceed," he says coldly. The girl bows and dissolves into black energy. The man, his long white hair catching the moonlight, raises his glass and says, "According to his will, everything will go as planned. Maple World will soon be liberated." Back at the gate, Debo, holding a small bag, counts 27 mana stones here without turning around. El Paume says, "Let's go." As they continue, the sun shines brightly overhead. Debo silently reflects, "I thought this guy was just a crazy person, but he's amazing. I've never seen fire magic used like that." He wonders if El Paume's abilities are telekinetic, controlling the fire with precision. Debo smiles stupidly, thinking, "If I stick with this guy, I'll definitely make a lot of money. My 30% cut will cover my sister's treatment." They come to a stop, and El Paume says, "We're here." Several more stumps appear, sitting idly on the ground. Debo, standing behind a rock, says, "There are 9 of them." El Paume nods. "That's the right number." Confused, Debo asks, "What do you mean by that?" El Paume gives him a serious look. As a small stone falls and one of the stumps opens its eyes, Debo leaps forward, swinging his axe. He cuts the monster in half with one blow, but the rest of the stumps charge at him. Debo frowns, turning to El Paume. "You're crazy. How am I supposed to defeat them all alone? Especially with this weapon." He dodges the stump's attacks, barely staying on his feet. "I wouldn't survive this, even if I had 9 lives," he shouts. "You're a terrible boss." Meanwhile, El Paume watches calmly, thinking to himself he'll have to master the polyarm soon. It's the best weapon for him. El Paume thought to himself that he didn't need to question how much potential this guy has. After all, he was the only one the polyarm hero Aaron took in as an apprentice. As Debo battles the stumps, he starts realizing the polyarm's potential. It hits at a distance, and it's pretty powerful, he muses. It's even more convenient than a sword swinging the polyarm. Debo cuts through the air, slashing at the monsters. Maybe this thing isn't so bad after all. El Paume notes that Debo has quickly grasped the basics of the polyarm, even before opening his first circle of power. Suddenly, a rumbling sound echoes through the desert, and the ground shakes beneath their feet. Debo looks up and asks, "Is that an earthquake?" The rock ahead of them cracks, and a massive, tree-like monster emerges. The creature swings its root-like limbs, scattering debris. Debo barely manages to land on his feet after the impact. He shouts, "Stumpy." As we are introduced to this region boss monster, the monster advances, and El Paume grabbed Debo, pushing him out of the way, saving his life. As Debo said, "Ouch," landing on his back. And El Paume, unfazed, ignites his staff with flames. "Being big doesn't mean it's strong," he says coolly, shooting a fire arrow at the giant tree. Debo thought to himself, "That's right, fire magic should do the trick." The monster deflects the first arrow with surprising speed. El Paume narrows his eyes. Its reflexes are better than expected. El Paume thought, "How about this attack?" shooting another fire arrow, adding telekinesis into the mix. Fiery arrows circle around the monster, but it manages to block most of them. "Even magic won't work on this thing," Debo yells. "What are we supposed to do?" El Paume calmly observes, thinking, "It's not that magic doesn't work. It wouldn't have parried the fire arrow off if that was the case. Its branches are in the way." I just need to clear a path. A massive shadow looms over them as the monster swings its branch toward Paume and Debo. The enormous branch comes crashing down. "Look out," Debo yells. But Paume, seemingly calm, raises his hand. A blue light envelops the ring on his finger, and a chunk of earth rises into the air, dodging the branch mid-swing. The floating rock allows both Paume and Debo to slide down to safety, though they're coughing from the dust. Debo, catching his breath, thanks him. "I thought I was done for," he says, shaking the dirt off his clothes. Paume nods toward the approaching stumps. "Deal with them," he orders. "Debo, when did they get here?" "Hold on." "Ugh, he's so fast." Flames engulfing his staff as he turns his attention to the massive tree monster. Paume fires another fire arrow in hopes of getting rid of its branches. Sweating nervously, from a distance, Debo thought that this wouldn't do. "We can't take that monster down without a solid tactic. We must retreat and come up with a plan." Debo watches the battle unfold, his jaw dropping in awe. "I can't believe he's going one-on-one with that thing," Debo exclaims. Paume finally spots an opening. Using his first fire arrow as a distraction, he fired another through the explosion, catching Stumpy, the boss monster, off guard as it slightly dodges the fire arrow, burning its trunky cheek. Debo shouting with amazement it worked. Paume simultaneously prepared for another fire arrow, as he thought to himself that it's impossible to land hits, even with the help of telekinesis. However, the second fire arrow made it through. He thought to himself, "I am able to cast 2 spells at the same time, being a 2-circle adventurer," blasting its massive tree limbs off. As the monster screams in pain, Debo thought to himself, "Amazing." As he fends off a tree stump, Debo reviewed the tactic that Paume used. He hit another fire arrow behind the first one. The monster may be quick, but it wouldn't be able to stop one attack after another. To think Stumpy is struggling against one man. Maybe my boss is way stronger than I gave him credit for. Debo, coming back to his own reality, thought, "Shoot." No. As we see the small tree stumps approach Paume from behind, Debo shouted, "Look out, behind you." Debo thought, "Crap, I lost some of them because there were too many." However, Paume easily destroyed the small stumps around him without turning around. His eyes shifted to Debo as he said, "You can't even take care of a few common monsters, Debo." The monsters saw this as an opportunity to attack Paume because he was distracted. Paume easily dodged and thought, "Arg, not a moment of peace." Stumpy swinged its massive tree branch towards Paume as he was in midair, unable to dodge. Debo grabbed him, throwing him to the side, slicing the tree branch in 2. As Debo landed, he said, "I saved your butt once, so we're even now." Paume grins and said, "Good. Now I'm getting my money's worth." They both said it in unison. "Let's end this." Paume charged his dual fire arrows as Debo dashed toward the beast. Firing the twin arrows in unison, Paume and Debo managed to reduce the number of branches protecting the monster. The boss monster turned quickly, swinging its massive branch with tremendous force. However, Paume, quick-witted, had already fired another arrow. Debo seized this opportunity while the monster was distracted. He ran along its trunk, cutting down one of its bulky branches. Just as another fire arrow zoomed past, destroying 2 more branches, the beast screamed in agony. However, Paume noticed the beast was preparing to strike Debo with both remaining branches. Paume shouted, "I've got your right," using a combination of fire and telekinesis. He readied another attack. Debo grinned and prepared his polearm for a devastating swing, replying, "As you wish." Both managed to remove the 2 branches heading their way. Debo, due to the speed of his landing, slid along the tree trunk. He dashed along the side of another branch, slashing away at more tree limbs, as we could see chips and cracks forming in his polearm. Suddenly, Debo was caught off guard by a massive trunk, hitting him with enough force to almost knock him unconscious, causing him to cough up blood. Stumpy, the monster, saw this opportunity to devour Debo. But Paume levitated a rock towards him, rescuing him from certain doom. The beast, relentless, destroyed the rock platform beneath Debo. Enraged, Paume snarled, "You little," as his arm became engulfed in blue mana. He scattered rocks across the battlefield, which Debo used as stepping stones to dodge the monster's continued attacks. Paume skillfully manipulated his fire arrows, eliminating more branches with ease. Stumpy lost track of Debo, who quickly closed in and shouted, "Now's our chance." Debo with immense force. Debo swung his polearm, plunging it deep into one of the beast's eyes, shattering its vision. The creature shrieked in pain, thrashing wildly. As Debo hung from the beast, his grip slipped, causing him to fall to the ground at high speed. Despite this, Debo stood up, unfazed, and yelled, "I'm not done yet, you punk." He launched himself back at the monster, with Paume's telekinetic aura intensifying as he focused on retrieving Debo's polearm from the beast's eye. The weapon spun through the air, landing in Debo's hands as he smirked. "Here comes your dessert, you stupid tree," Debo roared, slashing Stumpy numerous times, blinding its remaining eye. The monster screamed louder than before, moving uncontrollably and flinging Debo from its body. As Debo hit the ground, he looked up and saw Stumpy preparing to consume him whole. Staring at his impending doom, orange figures whizzed past him, resembling shooting stars. These were El Paume's twin fire arrows, spiraling around each other as they entered the beast's gaping mouth. The arrows cracked and shattered its core, engulfing the massive tree stump in raging flames. The monster's screams grew even louder, signaling its life was coming to an end. Debo huffed and puffed, catching his breath as El Paume walked up beside him and said, "Good work." El Paume struck a heroic pose, proud of their accomplishment. Debo, still winded, responded, "Yeah." They watched as the boss monster burned away, its flames flickering like a campfire. A certain amount of time passed, and it was night in Maple World. However, there was still a light on in one of the windows in the city. A young lady sat alone at a table, her head tilted as she stared at the plate of food in front of her. Realizing it was very late, she decided she needed to eat quickly and go to bed. She cupped her hands together, closed her eyes, and wished herself a good meal. Just as she was about to start eating, a sudden knock on the door startled her. She froze for a moment, then whirled around to face the door. She approached cautiously, opening it just a crack, and asked who was there. Her eyes widened in shock as she recognized the figure standing in the doorway. His clothes and body were still slightly smeared with blood, but he tried to smile. "Is it really you?" she whispered. Her brother stood there, simply saying, "I'm back." The young lady tried to control her emotions by clenching the fabric of her clothes tightly. Her palms shook as she fought to hold back her tears, but she couldn't stop them from flowing down her cheeks. Without another thought, she ran toward Debo and hugged him tightly, congratulating him on his return. The overwhelming relief and joy of seeing him alive again made her grip even tighter. Meanwhile, in a house that stood alone in the woods, El Paume stood silently. He was staring at the bed where a man lay motionless, clutching his fire staff in his hands. He tightened his lips, as if suppressing deep emotions. On a nearby cabinet was a photograph of a younger El Paume, standing next to the man with his hands on his shoulders. Both of them were smiling happily in the picture. Ignoring the image, El Paume's attention remained fixed on the severely emaciated man in the bed. The man's body was covered in dark spots, evidence of some mysterious illness. El Paume stood there for a while, frowning and motionless, before finally activating his magic. He concentrated the energy through the fire staff, his face expressionless as he focused on the task at hand. A little later, after releasing a powerful attack, flames began to spread throughout the house. The fire quickly caught on to the structure, and the once peaceful home was engulfed in flames. El Paume turned his back on the burning building, walking away without looking back. He paid no attention to the fire roaring behind him, the heat intensifying as it devoured the house. His expression remained cold, his mind set on moving forward. The photograph, along with the rest of the house, turned to ashes as El Paume disappeared into the darkness. The flames raged on, but El Paume's heart had already burned away the last of his attachments. Abai sighed, remarking that they had a problem. He sat with a lit cigarette between his teeth, his fingers resting wearily on his forehead. With a deep frown, he acknowledged that it was time to send people to the 100-person gate, but he didn't know who to choose. He remembered that Larkin was responsible for this trip, and the weight of its success or failure weighed heavily on his mind. This trip was crucial and would draw the attention of all the top guilds. The 100-player gate was expected to hold items of epic rank or higher, and Abais estimated there might even be legendary items. He honestly admitted to himself that managing this would be extremely difficult. Tapping the ash from his cigar into the ashtray, he thought about the 3 Natasha sisters from the Gold Guild. They were so strong that it was hard to believe they only had second circle strength. Comparing them to second circle adventurers from the Gaper Guild, Abais mused that his guild members would be ashamed to call themselves adventurers. Even without them, the seekers from the top 10 guilds posed a threat, especially since the Gaper Guild was the weakest among the largest. He tried to take his mind off these concerns and glanced at the paperwork featuring El Paume's picture. Suddenly, the door to his office swung open abruptly, causing Abais to look up in disgust. "Who dares to barge in without knocking?" he demanded, his voice sharp. His indignation quickly faded, however, as he stood up in shock. Larkin, he stammered, recognizing the figure. Larkin slowly walked around Abais's desk and took a seat where Abais had been sitting. Bowing his head in apology, Abais explained that he hadn't finalized the lineup yet. Larkin, usually not the type to be patient, pointed out that Abyss wasn't the kind of person to take long with such decisions. "How's our friend doing?" Larkin asked. Abyss admitted he still had his concerns, letting out another sigh. Larkin could sense his doubt, just like before. Abyss explained that the Shev group had been destroyed last time, and since there were no witnesses, it was impossible to determine what had happened in the dungeon. He acknowledged Paume's talent but said that wasn't the issue at hand. Larkin raised his hand, suggesting that Abyss check out Paume again to determine whether or not he was truly capable of handling the situation. Abyss looked at him quizzically, surprised by the suggestion. Larkin, thinking things over, told him to gather all the candidates and offered to give them a little push this time. Resting his hand on his chin, Larkin grinned and added that this time there would be plenty of witnesses. Sometime later, when Debo arrived at the gate in the forest, following behind Paume, he cried out in surprise. This time there were far more people than he had anticipated. Though he noted that this was often the case, the sheer number of adventurers gathered in front of the gate was staggering. Paume said nothing as he continued walking forward, stopping suddenly when someone ahead asked if they were the fifth group supposed to be there. The person crossed his arms and scowled, his expression filled with disdain. "Two former slaves," he remarked with clear disgust. Paume didn't respond to the provocation, only narrowing his eyes slightly as he scanned the crowd. He noticed the displeasure on the faces of other adventurers, and it was immediately clear that he and Debo weren't welcome. The more experienced the teams were, the more confident they became. They viewed slaves as a nuisance. Paume noted that the nearby adventurers likely had one or two circles, a stark difference from Shev's team, who didn't need bait slaves. At that moment, Abyss approached with 2 men in tow, ordering everyone to gather around. The adventurers, distracted from their conversations, turned their attention to him, astonished that he had come in person. With a cigar hanging from his mouth, Abyss warned them not to rant and explained that they were about to run a test. "Those who demonstrate their abilities will get a special opportunity," he added. "Mr. Red Headband asked in disbelief. "A special opportunity?" Abyss grinned, extending his hand. "Yes, a chance to enter the 100-person gate," he confirmed. All the adventurers were stunned to hear about the 100-person gate. Mr. Red Headband, his face filled with shock, shouted, "The 100-person gate!" Abyss nodded, confirming that this was indeed a rare opportunity for them. Paume, remaining calm, quietly noted to himself that he understood what Abyss was trying to do. Abyss's voice broke through the silence as he finally ordered the start of the test raid. As groups of adventurers entered the gate, designed for 40 people, there was a blinding red flash of light. Each group arrived at the forest, taking in their surroundings. Mr. Red Headband turned to Dolan with a serious expression, suggesting they cooperate only during the boss fight. Dolan nodded in agreement. He suggested splitting up and meeting when the signal was given. Without argument, the adventurers dispersed into teams, spreading out through the forest. Paume and Debo lingered near the portal, watching the other groups scatter. While Paume remained calm, Debo lowered his head slightly, his lips pressed tightly together. Dolan's team passed through the woods, and with a serious expression, he drew his comrades' attention. "Time is short," he warned, ordering them to make the most of it. One of the girls on his team smiled confidently and expressed her agreement. Just then, Dolan noticed a rustle in the bushes. As he got closer, he saw a monster and muttered in annoyance. "Is it really just one monster?" He was further irritated when he realized it was a mushroom-like creature. "We're wasting time," he said, holding out his staff. Concentrating his mana, Dolan prepared to attack, and his team members grinned, watching his actions. Using a bolt of energy, Dolan directed his magic toward the monster. He thought it was too boring of a fight, and after his attack, he ordered his team members to take the magic stone. He mentioned that once they did that, they could move on. However, as the small blue explosion dissipated, Dolan and the other adventurers noticed the monster was still intact. They were stunned and asked in surprise, "Is the monster still alive?" Startled, Dolan panicked, wondering if magic attacks didn't work on this type of creature. If that were the case, the monster might have a high resistance to magic. Just as the other team members were about to join the battle, Dolan was distracted by the sudden rise of wind. He quickly warned everyone to stop and urged them to be careful. His eyes widened as he noticed a large number of similar monsters nearby. The team stood back to back, fending off the monster's attacks from all directions, realizing with horror that they were surrounded. They fought for a while, until the last monster let out a final scream and collapsed. Exhausted, the team members froze in place, panting heavily and closing their eyes in relief. They were finally done, but fatigue was setting in. One of the girls on Dolan's team shouted that the monsters were much stronger than they had expected. Aware of the truth, Dolan admitted, "I don't think it's a good idea to keep targeting common monsters. They outnumber us, and our stamina will run out faster." Dolan suggested taking a risk and offered to break the alliance to focus on killing the boss himself. The girl looked puzzled by his decision. Meanwhile, Paume told Debo that this was likely what most teams were thinking. Debo, who had been leaning on his polearm, breathing heavily, agreed, saying that the teams were too proud to work together. Suddenly, he changed the subject and asked Paume if he planned on helping out since he had been silent. Paume glanced at the corpses of the monsters lying next to Debo and replied that there had only been 3 monsters, so Debo could handle it himself. Debo noted aloud that they didn't have time to waste standing around. Paume agreed and told him, "Let's get moving." Paume insisted that they needed to kill every common monster in sight, but Debo disagreed. He argued that they should head straight for the boss. Confused, Debo asked, "What does this mean? Didn't you just say we were going after the boss?" Paume gave him a slightly displeased look and explained that while it might seem like they were boss hunting, the other teams would likely take care of the smaller monsters on their own. He emphasized that killing a boss wasn't the only measure of ability, and hunting smaller monsters was also crucial. Besides, there were dangers associated with competing against other groups for the boss. Debo, though annoyed, admitted that Paume was right, sarcastically calling him Mr. Know-it-all. Paume, unfazed, admitted that he was getting a disturbing vibe from this gate and looked straight ahead with a serious expression. Meanwhile, Dolan's team ventured deeper into the forest. The girl on his team suddenly drew his attention to something and asked him to look in the direction she was pointing. Dolan paused, puzzled, and the girl explained that it appeared to be an exit gate. Noticing the potential escape route, Dolan admitted he wasn't interested in finding it now but agreed that it would be good to leave a mark on the road, just in case. The rest of the team agreed with him. However, a team member suddenly stopped and began laughing uncontrollably. Dolan, in confusion, asked, "What's the matter with you?" He told the man to be quiet, warning him that he might draw more monsters. But the laughter continued. Dolan, now irritated, approached the man and placed a hand on his shoulder, reminding him of the danger. "What if you draw monsters this way?" he scolded. Avante, still laughing and crying at the same time, turned to face Dolan. As Dolan let go of his shoulder in horror, he noticed the purple fog surrounding the other team members. They, too, had started laughing uncontrollably. Dolan realized it was laughing spores and immediately began running in the direction of the gate. But before he could escape, a massive mushroom-like monster appeared behind him, its mouth wide open, watching him closely. Dolan continued running, but the monster released another dose of laughing spores from its body. He glanced back and saw the creature's face, its mouth wide open, revealing sharpened teeth and a crooked smile. Unable to resist the spores any longer, Dolan let out a loud laugh. He inhaled the spores deeply, and sweat broke out on his face. Yet he couldn't stop laughing as the spores took full effect, leaving him frozen in place. Sometime later, Paume and Debo were walking along the upper edge of a canyon with a fast-flowing river at its bottom. Debo, looking at Paume ahead, cursed him silently, frustrated and wondering if Paume planned to fight at all today. He was annoyed that he alone had been engaging in battles. Lost in his thoughts, something suddenly caught Debo's eye. He looked to the side in surprise, his eyes widening when he noticed a red signal light in the sky. Drawing Paume's attention to it, Debo announced, "It's the call to assemble." They both stopped, raising their heads to look at the signal. As they approached the area where the other teams had already gathered, Debo admitted he was a bit surprised that everyone was notified as soon as the boss monster was found. He smiled slightly, satisfied that things were progressing. Meanwhile, Paume narrowed his eyes, assessing the adventurers standing across from them, realizing one team was missing. Iburu sighed, looking around and assuming everyone had arrived. He began explaining the situation when Joubert caught his attention, reminding him that Dolan's wizard team was still missing. Iburu mentioned that there was no point in waiting for them, as the boss had already been discovered. He continued, adding that it was also the same monster that had killed Dolan and his companions. Iburu recalled the gruesome scene, picturing the monster with its mouth smeared in blood and one of Dolan's team members clutched in its grasp. The boss in this area was none other than the clown poison mushmom. Hearing this, Joubert turned to Iburu and asked, "Is he serious? Everyone knew their teams weren't strong enough for such a battle." If this was true, clearing the gate was pointless, though they still needed a way out. Standing beside Paume, Debo caught his attention and asked cautiously, "Is this clown mushroom really that dangerous?" Paume, recognizing the threat they faced, mentally noted that encountering mushmom at their current level was incredibly dangerous. Noticing that Paume wasn't responding, Debo called out again, asking if he was even listening. Paume remained silent, resting his chin thoughtfully. He considered that the spores released by the surrounding monsters made melee combat ineffective. It was impossible to trap the boss in a pincer attack, meaning they'd have to rely on ranged combat. But with mushmom's speed and strength, attacking recklessly without a solid plan would be foolish. As Paume pondered this, Debo grew increasingly exasperated, calling out to him again, telling him not to ignore the situation. Finally, crossing his arms over his chest, Iburu announced that the clown-poisoned mushmom was directly in front of the exit portal. The only way to reach it was by defeating the boss. Debo chuckled confidently, lightly tapping his fist against his chest. "Is that really a problem?" he asked, certain that Paume's fire arrows could easily deal with mushmom. But before he could continue, Paume interrupted, calling his name sternly and ordering him to be quiet. Annoyed by this dismissal, Debo gritted his teeth, silently cursing Paume. Paume explained that without a solid strategy they would all die. Even a fire arrow wouldn't be enough to scratch this boss. Debo's eyes widened in disbelief. "Why not?" he asked, confused. Paume elaborated, explaining that even the ordinary monsters here had solid defenses. "If the regular monsters are this tough, there's no point in even thinking about the boss," he added. The adventurers, including Iburu, listened in silence, absorbing this grim assessment. Iburu muttered sarcastically, "Thanks for the explanation, Captain Obvious," under his breath. He added, "Stinking slaves." At that moment, one of the other adventurers stepped forward excitedly, reminding everyone that now wasn't the time for infighting. They needed a solution. Suddenly, Paume raised his hand and demanded 50,000 mesos per person. Hearing this, Iburu looked at him in bewilderment and asked, "What do you mean by that?" Paume, still holding his hand up, calculated that with 30 adventurers, the total would come to 1.5 million mesos. The others stood listening intently. Paume then pointed at Debo, who stood behind him, and promised that if the payment was made, they would act as bait slaves. Debo's mouth dropped open in shock, but he said nothing. For a moment, everyone stood frozen, processing Paume's offer. Finally, as if fully understanding what Paume had just said, Debo put his hands on his head, staring in disbelief. He asked himself if Paume had gone completely mad. Suddenly, Iburu, unable to control his emotions, angrily ordered Paume not to interfere. He suggested that Paume still had a slave's mindset and warned him not to assume that everything would go as he wished. Iburu was certain that using bait slaves wouldn't help in this situation. If the slaves died immediately, it would be all over for the adventurers. That was why, in a high-level gate like this, slaves were more of a hindrance than a help. Stepping forward, Iburu pointed a finger at both Debo and Paume, asking who they thought they were to suggest such an idea. He then focused on Debo, noting that from what he could see, Debo hadn't even fully awakened yet. Iburu sneered, questioning what a man with second circle abilities and a slave could possibly do. Debo, growing increasingly furious, clenched his jaw, the veins in his face becoming more visible. Iburu's words were starting to infuriate him. He couldn't understand why Iburu was always so condescending, constantly pushing him. Debo thought bitterly about how he had never considered becoming bait slaves. His rage was barely contained, and he gritted his teeth as his anger built. Meanwhile, Paume remained calm. He held out his hand and asked, "What does Iburu suggest then?" He assumed Iburu must have a better plan. As Paume watched Iburu mutter to himself, hesitating, he realized that there wasn't another plan. Otherwise, Iburu wouldn't have gathered everyone here. Closing his eyes, Paume continued, "There's something else," he said. Crossing his arms over his chest, he announced that their team had one person with second circle strength and one with first circle abilities. Debo was taken aback by this revelation and asked, "Is this really serious?" He looked down at his wrist and noticed a glowing circle. With a broad smile, Debo laughed and asked, "When did this appear?" suggesting that he must have some hidden talent. Paume reminded him that the other adventurers only had a few people with second circle strength. Hearing this, Iburu clenched his teeth in exasperation, ready to protest. But before he could speak, Jubert suddenly ran forward, asking him to stop. She held out her hand in front of her and, placing it on her chest, promised that she would pay the price if Paume and Debo acted as bait slaves. Jubert spoke confidently, though she admitted that she didn't have 100,000 mesos for the two of them at that moment. As Paume listened, he closed his eyes, contemplating her offer. Paume stated, "Then we'll collect the payment after we all get out, though it would mean we sacrificed ourselves for nothing if we fail to escape," he added. "But only if every one of you here accepts my proposal unanimously." He urged them, "Come on, we don't have all day." Back at the exit gate, spores lingered in the air and we heard crunching. It was Mushmom, eating a member of Dolan's party. Suddenly, an object approached the boss at immense speed. Mushmom noticed, but it was too late. It was a fire arrow, blasting the beast in the face, causing a thick, purple smoke screen. Paume told Debo, "We must move as soon as the monster spots us." Debo replied, "Are you really sure about this, sir?" The monster spotted them, its eyes glowing red as it launched itself toward them. Paume calmly stated, "Here it comes." They started running, and Debo exclaimed, "What the?" It's super fast. The boss, now running on all fours, began closing the distance between them. Joubert told the others, "Now's our chance." Activated before the decoys died. The exit portal materialized, and Joubert shouted, "Let's get moving, quickly." Meanwhile, Paume and Debo continued running from the beast. Debo flinched as he noticed a wave of monsters rushing toward him. "You stinking monsters, do I look like a pushover to you?" he shouted, activating his skill. "You'll pay for underestimating me," he declared, slashing the monsters in front of him with a powerful slash blast. However, Mushmom caught up to Debo first, extending its mouth to consume him. Another fire arrow blasted it in the face, knocking the beast off its feet as it growled softly, trying to regain its composure. Paume taunted, "Take another one," but the beast dodged. Paume activated his telekinesis, redirecting the fire arrow to follow the beast. Mushmom skillfully dodged, rapidly gaining on them. Debo shouted, "Damn it, it's going to get me." Paume instructed him to jump, and Mushmom missed them by a split second. "Listen up, you punk," Debo shouted, "eat this." As Paume prepared another fire arrow, he aimed with sharp focus and fired, causing a massive explosion on the hill, and both of them fell into the river below. "You stupid mushroom," Debo muttered, saying he thought he was really going to die. Both Paume and Debo, drenched, sat catching their breath by the riverbank. Debo asked, "Just what manner of beast is that thing?" Paume replied, "You heard the guy from before. That's the boss monster of this gate." As Paume squeezed the excess water from his robe, he added, "Looks like we'll need to be better prepared to hunt it down." Debo stared at Paume as if he was either delusional or hadn't heard him correctly. "Oh, sir? I'm getting the impression you intend to attack it with just the two of us," Debo said. "Please tell me I'm wrong." Paume nodded and confirmed. "You're right for once." Debo, shocked, shouted, "Is this some kind of twisted joke?" Paume, unfazed, asked, "Are you upset?" "Killing it is the purpose of our trip here," Debo remarked. "That was before we knew we were dealing with such a terrifying beast." "Ever heard of a strategic retreat?" Paume calmly stated, "You cannot re-enter a gate, you retreat from." Debo, annoyed, said, "I know." That he thought to himself, "Just how is this guy planning to hunt the beast down when fire arrows don't even work on it?" "You said you'd die against that creature too, didn't you?" Debo questioned. Paume replied, "Things have changed. Our competition withdrew on their own, and we'll get money on top of that. Isn't that awesome? What do you say?" Paume stared at Debo, his resolve radiating from his eyes. "Do you wish to terminate the contract?" he asked. Debo, at a loss for words, quickly said, No, I wasn't thinking of running away or anything," as he scratched his head. "Just promise me a fat incentive for all this," Debo added. Paume smiled and said, "I will." Debo then asked, "How do you plan to hunt down a beast that can resist both melee and ranged attacks? Because I don't want to risk my life for something that's not possible." He stared at Paume, clearly worried. "Is there really a way for us to win?" Paume remained silent as he stared back. Suddenly, a red flash indicated that the other groups had made it outside safely. Ibis, confused, thought already. He watched as adventurers ran and collapsed, struggling to catch their breath. Ibis remarked, "Isn't that a bit too fast? Considering it's a 40-person gate." He asked Joubert, "How did the raid go? I see a few people are missing, including that kid." Joubert, catching her breath, replied, "The raid is a failure. Dolan's party was eliminated, and Paume's party is still inside. We barely escaped because Paume voluntarily acted as the decoy. We can't defeat the dungeon boss on our own." Ibis stood motionless upon hearing the report. He angrily replied, "What? So, you fled without doing anything?" Joubert defended herself, saying, "We were facing the clown poison mushmom, known for its tenacity. It's not like we had a choice." Ibis stomped on his cigar as he turned away, saying, "We give up on the gate." A man dressed in full black, seeming more skilled than the other adventurers, approached. Joubert, puzzled, shouted, "Lord Ibis, but Paume's party is still inside the gate. The portal is still active, so they must be alive." Ibis coldly replied, "But they'll die soon. It's only a matter of time. You said they're up against the clown poison mushmom." Walking away, Ibis added, "You may loiter around if you wish. I have work to do." As he left, Joubert stood speechless. Useless fools, Ibis thought to himself. I get that the enemy is too powerful, but a two-circle adventurer cannot successfully hunt the clown poison mushmom. That much is clear. As he continued walking, flanked by two bodyguards dressed in black, Ibis reflected, however, people who only bring back the obvious results are easily replaceable. Back inside the dungeon, the boss monster idled, waiting. Ibis's thoughts lingered. I need guys who can pull off the impossible. Meanwhile, Paume stood on a cliff, charging immense fiery mana, preparing for a powerful fire arrow. It seemed much more intense than any of the fire arrows we had seen before. Under his breath, he muttered, "Let the hunt begin." He released the fire arrow, watching as it traveled through the air. Paume thought, "This foe is quicker and sturdier than any enemy I've faced before." It also releases toxic chemicals, making this engagement extremely difficult. He continued thinking, our only option is to stay far from the beast and unleash powerful attacks from a distance. But I can't deal enough damage with fire arrows alone. Paume's mana magnified as he added telekinesis to the fire arrow. As the fire arrow began to swirl rapidly through the air, Paume thought, if I spin the magical arrow using telekinesis, its piercing power is amplified. He reflected on his inspiration, thinking, inspired by how bullets are fired, I invented a skill that only I can use in all of Maple World. This will truly make the impossible possible. Fusion magic revolver. The beast was caught off guard by the destructive fire arrow, which resembled a sniper bullet, as it crashed into its chest with immense force. The monster screamed in pain. The fiery projectile continued to rotate into the monster's chest, acting like a drill burrowing into the ground. It pierced through the beast's body and exited the opposite side. Paume watched, analyzing the results of his attack. We saw trees destroyed, crackling with flames due to the powerful strike. The monster, still standing, clearly sustained damage. Upon closer inspection, the monster's light purple blood poured from the wound, but Paume thought, damn, I was aiming for the nucleus in its head. He sighed. What a bummer, as the monster screamed in fury. It ran toward the source of its pain. While charging at the cliff, Paume prepared another revolver attack, but mushmom dodged, gaining more speed. It's not easy to change the trajectory while retaining the spin, and the cooldown is tough. Paume thought, frustrated. He fired another revolver, aiming for the top of the beast. Meanwhile, Debo lurked behind a tree, preparing for an ambush. As the monster roared, Paume shouted. Now a hand gripped a rope tightly. It was Debo, resembling a ninja. He pulled the rope fast with all his might, causing sparks to flicker alongside the tree trunks, tripping the beast as it splashed into the swampy water. Getting up, the mushmom shook off the swampy water as Paume watched from above. The beast paused, its body dripping, while Paume stared down at it, planning his next move. Mushmom roared, but Debo shouted mockingly, "Ha, you look like food waste covered in filth." Demonstrating a new strategic move, Debo flung his flaming poliarm, attached to a rope, directly at Mushmom's head. The weapon cut deep into the beast's skull, causing it to scream in agonizing pain. Using the rope's momentum, Debo retracted the poliarm back into his hands. The beast glared at him, and Debo remarked, "I can finally breathe a little," with a confident smirk. He waved his finger, gesturing for the beast to come at him. Now that the air quality is much better, what do you say to some outdoor activities? The battle continued as Debo prepared to confront Mushmom. Above, Paume observed, thinking that the conditions were finally met. The most crucial part of his tactic was to lure the beast into the swamp. After all, neutralizing a target's strengths was fundamental to hunting any monster. Their enemy had just lost its greatest advantage. The monster roared in frustration, and Debo taunted, "What's wrong? Is something stopping you from releasing that nasty stuff?" He added with a grin, "Good to hear," as he swung his poliarm, loosening his grip to extend the range with the rope, relentlessly beating the beast. Mushmom's body began to crack, but Debo showed no signs of stopping, despite the beast's attempts to block the attacks. Mushmom screamed in pain, swinging its arm and knocking the poliarm away as it launched itself at Debo. Paume remarked that clogging the monster's pores wasn't the only purpose of bringing it here, since agile creatures are at a disadvantage in the swamp. Paume launched another unique fire spell, revolver hitting the beast directly as it tried to block with both arms. An explosion engulfed the beast, and Debo asked, "Did we do it?" Watching the fog clear, he noticed the beast was still alive and commented, "What a resilient little." Paume shouted, "Aim for the head. Its nucleus should be there somewhere," Debo replied. "I know that," as he swung his poliarm at the beast. Just before impact, Mushmom grabbed the poliarm, dragging Debo closer. Paume, unfazed, held out his hand and activated his telekinesis, hurling a massive log toward the beast, slamming it into its face and saving Debo from certain death. Debo seized the opportunity, gripping a branch on the log, while Mushmom threw the log behind itself. Using the momentum, Debo kicked the beast directly on the top of its head, landing safely on a tree root. With his poliarm in hand, Debo launched back into the fight, dashing around Mushmom as Paume used telekinesis to raise the swamp water around the beast, blocking its line of sight. Water splashed over Mushmom, causing it to flinch in confusion. The beast slashed through a shadow in the water with its sharp claws, only to realize it was a decoy. Behind it, Debo swung his poliarm with intense focus, his expression as fierce as if someone had stolen his lunch. And he knew who the culprit was. He struck Mushmom, slicing its head clean off as the head splashed into the water. Mushmom's body stood still for a moment as Debo, panting heavily, looked up at Paume and gave him a thumbs up. Paume smiled, but the smile turned into a frightened stare as he noticed the headless beast's body moving once again. Mushmom slammed Debo, knocking him down and flinging his poliarm aside. Letting out an ear-piercing roar, the beast charged again, and Paume thought, how is this possible? Debo clearly destroyed its head. Preparing another fire arrow, he fired at Mushmom, but the beast easily dodged, moving at outrageous speeds toward Paume. Something isn't right, Paume thought, using telekinesis to levitate the log with Mushmom on top of it into the air. Mushmom dashed forward, latching onto the side of the cliff, climbing rapidly. Paume observed, realizing, I probably only have one fire arrow left. There won't be another shot after this, so I have to be precise. Meanwhile, Debo slowly got up, mumbling, damn it, you'll pay for this. You dimwit. Blood covered his face from the blow to his head, but he armed himself with his poliarm. Using his slash blaze technique, he sent his poliarm flying toward the beast like a moth to a flame. The poliarm cut through the beast, slicing its lower torso, which fell to the swamp below. Hey, serves you right, Debo shouted triumphantly, only to realize the relentless beast was still alive. Mushmom used its arms to continue climbing toward Paume. The beast dodged another of Paume's fire arrows, revealing a small red light shining from its chest, as if there was another creature within it. The beast let out an evil shriek, and Paume, unfazed, remarked, so that's your real head. The creature seemed to understand his words, looking at him nervously. Paume smirked and said, thanks for confirming that he equipped his flare gun, which Debo noticed below, thinking, isn't that his flare gun? So that attack just now wasn't real. Paume's fire staff responded to his mana, increasing in intensity as he released another unique combo spell, Revolver, targeting the beast's core directly. The spell struck Mushmom's core as Debo dodged the toxic release. A loud explosion consumed the swamp as Paume observed from the cliff. Upon death, Mushmom released a cloud of toxic laughing gas, catching Debo off guard. Can't you just die gracefully, he muttered. A rope wrapped around Debo, pulling him to safety, and he landed beside Paume. Phew, I thought we were done for, Debo said. As Paume looked over the toxic spore-filled swamp below, Debo asked, is it really over? Paume confirmed. Yeah, great work, Debo. We'll collect the loot once the poison mist clears. Just then, a figure lunged toward Paume from behind. Noticing the presence, he turned around, and both he and Debo were startled as the beast's corpse, covered in toxic poison, came crashing down. Debo laughed in disbelief as the attack unfolded. We shift over to Ibis, who entered his office, reporting to Lord Larkin. Larkin chuckled after hearing the report, commenting, so you returned without accomplishing anything? You're as hot-headed as ever. Ibis apologized, then suggested, why don't we make an official request to the Cygnus Knights before a knock interrupted their conversation? Turning to the guest at the door, Ibis said, didn't I make myself clear? No visitors allowed at the moment. To his surprise, Paume responded from outside, I'm coming in. Ibis, taken aback, replied, what? How dare you enter? His tone softened as he stared at Paume in shock. I just got back from the gate, Paume announced calmly. Larkin grinned, adding with amusement, this is truly fascinating. Larkin told Ibis he had some explaining to do as Paume stood at the door. Larkin asked Paume if he had risen from the dead or something, then relaxed in his chair, saying, anywho, it's a pleasure. I'm Larkin. You must be Paume, and as the reports suggest, you clearly possess a keen survival instinct, just the type of adventurer Gapur is looking for. Paume bowed, responding, you're too kind. Larkin replied, great manners too. Let me ask you a question. Ibis, still puzzled, stared at Paume. Larkin asked, with that instinct of yours, do you think it'll save your skin within the 100-person gate as well? Paume stared silently for a moment, then replied, that's not going to be easy. Larkin, intrigued, waited for him to continue. Furious, Ibis shouted, "How dare you? You're speaking to Lord Larkan here." As his face reddened, veins visibly pulsing, Ibis continued, "Do you think I promoted you as an adventurer so you could pick and choose your jobs?" He reminded El Paume not to forget he was still greatly indebted to their guild. El Paume remained calm and silent, unfazed by Ibis's outburst. Larkan smirked and said, "Not easy? So it sounds like it's still possible." Then he continued, "I don't like hints and suggestions, so I'll be straightforward. What do you want?" El Paume met Larkan's gaze with a serious expression. We then shifted to Debo, who spit out what appeared to be root beer, struggling to process what he had just heard from El Paume. "What? 5 million mesos per person? That's 10 mil for the two of us. Don't you think that's too much?" They sat in a bar as the root beer Debo had spit out dripped from El Paume's face. Debo apologized. "Oh, I'm sorry. Anyhow, I think you went too far this time," he added. "They're probably going to withdraw their offer. And this was a great opportunity," too, El Paume replied. "So what? The decision is theirs to make, not mine," as he wiped the root beer off his face. Debo retorted, "Geez, do you have any idea what you just did? What if this whole raid gets canceled?" He pointed out that they'd only succeed in making an enemy of Ibis. Just then, they noticed a foot approaching them. The figure turned out to be Iburu, who said, "Having fun. Because we clearly didn't enjoy being compared to you two." Joubert was with him. Debo slammed his hands on the table and rose from his seat, replying, "What? Is that how you express gratitude for saving your lives?" Debo continued, "All right. That's it. I never liked you either. Come outside, and we'll settle it." Iburu and Joubert both bowed, and Iburu said, "We're truly sorry." Iburu acknowledged, "Prejudice got in the way. As an adventurer myself, I feel ashamed to have misjudged your skills. I'd like to offer my sincere apology." He handed over the promised 1.5 million mesos for 30 people, adding, "Each of us added a bit extra to show our gratitude." Debo, still in a daze, muttered, "Okay, thanks." El Paume replied coolly, "We don't need extras. We agreed on 1.5 million mesos, and we only did what we're getting paid for." Coldly, he added, "No more, no less than that. Take your expressions of gratitude elsewhere." Shocked, Iburu and Joubert fell silent, while Debo grumbled, "Damn it, there goes my bonus." Debo continued, "Now I'll probably have to count all this and return the extras." Pirate man Iburu, was it? El Paume looked at Iburu and asked, "What about you? Can you do what you're getting paid for?" Iburu, lost for words, stared at El Paume. We shifted back to Ibis, who shouted, "I'm absolutely against it. 10 million mesos? We could hire 3 or even 4 circle adventurers with that much." He argued, "It's true he's the best candidate to join this raid, but he's going to take our kindness for granted at this rate." Ibis continued, "I'm pretty sure he made this offer to see how we'd react. Why don't we summon him again and renegotiate?" Larkan responded with a sharp look. "I beg to differ, Ibis. Truth be told, I'd be willing to pay him twice as much." Shaken, Ibis asked, "What is this?" as Larkan handed him a piece of paper. "We're only going to dispatch El Paume's party to this raid." Shocked, Ibis thought, "Just the 2 of them? Absurd." He fidgeted as the implication sank in. "What kind of? Is this true, Lord Larkan?" We saw Larkan leaning back comfortably in his chair. He replied, "I'd be upset if it wasn't true, since I paid good money to get this information from Dark Lord Jin." With a panicked expression, Ibis thought, "Dark Lord Jin? Then this has to be real." Larkan picked up his pen and said, "We need to wake up, Ibis. The war has already begun." We transitioned to a forest as the sun shone and a gentle breeze blew through the trees. A massive gate loomed larger than the previous ones. Below the gate, adventurers gathered around tents and campfires, chatting as they prepared. Someone remarked, "I can't believe they actually accepted your offer." Sir El Paume replied, "Don't get overly excited and focus." Debo replied, "Don't worry, I'm an experienced adventurer." Now we saw a golden bronze-like crest representing the Gapur Guild on El Paume's robe, drawing murmurs from the other adventurers around him. One adventurer cleaned his knife, casting a deadly glare in El Paume's direction. Debo commented, "I can feel the hostility in the air. The team's full of new faces, it seems." A new party member introduced himself. "Are you guys from the Gapur Merchant Guild?" "It's a pleasure. I'm Sholden, an E-rated adventurer from the Zenith Merchant Guild," El Paume replied. "C-rated adventurer." Sholden looked shocked, responding, "C-rated? I thought only up to 2 circle adventurers were allowed in this gate." "How can a C-rated?" A new party member interrupted, saying, "Hey, do me a favor and step aside." Crossing her arms, she added, "He and I have business to discuss." Sholden walked away, muttering, "You're friends with those condescending fools? What a waste of time." El Paume turned his attention to the new party member as we were briefly taken to the past. El Paume had asked, "Why do I have to?" Someone responded, "Just do as we tell you, damn it." Gapur Merchant Guild will be working with the Cygnus Knights for this raid. The narrator explained that the Cygnus Knights, who serve Empress Cygnus, are the most powerful order in terms of both battle prowess and authority. They had shown interest in this raid. Abis continued, "Since other merchant guilds already have full squads, we decided to let them tag along with our guys," he added. "Although they'll only be dispatching squires from their order, our chances of clearing the gate will increase." Abis went on, "I suspect there's a reason why they would go so far as to join this raid, but what they offered in return isn't bad, so I want you to cooperate with them," El Paume replied. "Understood. Working with them should not be a problem." Ibis warned, "Actually, don't let your guard down." Leaning back in his seat, he added, "Something about them seems off." Returning to the present, the female warrior introduced herself as Kiri of the Cygnus Knights, in charge of training squires. "Don't think for a second you're our equal, just because we struck a deal," she warned. Debo stared angrily as Kiri continued, "I don't want this to become a hassle, so don't do anything rash and just follow my lead." Debo muttered. "What? That condescending?" Kiri asked El Paume. "Is this all from Gapur, by the way?" El Paume replied, "Looks like it." She sighed, "Geez." So Gapur has pretty much given up. Footsteps approached, and other guild factions began to arrive. Members of the Deeg Merchant Guild and Crocus's party, along with Mardia Merchant Guild's Kubel's party, gathered around. Debo thought, elite forces from other guilds. The air suddenly feels a lot denser for some reason. The arrival of the Gold Ritchie Merchant Guild caught everyone's attention as the Natasha sisters joined the assembly. Kiri scoffed, "Pompous fools." A red-bearded man introduced himself, Lonko, one of the escorts for this raid. "We're here to support you on your way back out of the gate." Lonko explained, "As you may have heard, any legendary item discovered during this raid won't belong to its finder. Instead, your guild will own it, and you'll be compensated for your efforts. You can keep mana stones, so there's that. But if anyone is caught stealing an item, you'll face B-rated adventurers like myself." Debo, shocked, thought, 5 circle adventurers. Can all of them be? Lonko finished, "All right, that's it for the warning. Everyone, line up and head inside." Kiri took charge of El Paume's party, saying, "I lead, you follow." "Understood. We will clear this gate." As she walked away, Debo muttered, "I can't stand her. Do we really have to work with her?" El Paume thought to himself finally, "Everything I've done up until now was to join this raid." He recalled that he had never gone into this gate in his previous life. "It's still a mystery, but I must accomplish my goal here," he thought, "because this is where everything began." "Let's go," El Paume said to Debo. Debo replied, "I'm definitely not going to help her, even if she pleads with me later." Please ensure to like and subscribe for more.